Welcome to the Lost Signals Discusses Film and TV. Using the revolutionary Manzur-Ramosi Thurlow scale,
or MOTS,
we scrupulously review these art forms with an emphasis on narrative structure. Join us for another entertaining episode.
Hello there. Welcome back to the Lost Signals Discusses Film and Television. And tonight we are going to the Gothic South / West-ish, if you will, like hick country. Sorry if that's offensive. And we're going to review The Devil All the Time. I am Scott Thurlow, joined tonight with Jonathan Ian Manzer.
Hello.
And Chris Morgan.
Evening.
And Stephen Ramosi.
It was about 10 minutes into the movie when Stephen realized this quaint old man was never going to stop talking.
Yep, and voiceovers do happen in this movie. So, with that, I believe, who's got the login over here?
So I came up with something here. It's just a song reference. It's, yeah, the devil all the time. The devil all the time.
Okay.
Come on.
Anyone else have anything else?
Yeah, we do it all the time? No? All right.
All right. Well, either way, sorry, Chris, what's up?
Say, I can't believe it's not a Coen Brothers film.
Yeah, I think that's true. We'll get into that. But given that...
God, where art thou?
Uh-huh. Oh, devil, where art thou? Maybe that would have been a good logline. But either way, to jump into it, E, why don't you tell us about the plot of this film?
Well, in True Detective Season 4, basically this is a American Gothic horror story. Well, not really, more of a...
Gothic thriller, I guess.
Gothic thriller, but taking the kind of hits from American Gothic horror. We follow basically three plot lines throughout this. We have Tom Hollands, who plays a young man who his life is beset upon by tragedy. Many of it
born, almost literally born in the tragedy.
But also heavily influenced by faith, and his fellow orphan, who is sort of a sister to him, is molested by Robert Pattinson, which is all of our greatest fears, and sets him on a vigilante path. The B plot is a couple that sets out murdering people for art and for cuckoldry. It's their adventures. And we also have, for the C plot, a police officer who is ambitious but finds himself thrown into the local pimp and his redemptive and then not redemptive arc. And basically, this is a piece that focuses on volatile characters in a situation where religion and power conflict, and it's basically them traveling their paths and how they interact and how it all comes to a conclusion. Very much like I made a comparison to LA Confidential, which had a similar, where you followed three separate characters, all with very different personalities and all with their flaws, as they found police corruption. Here, though, there's no real underlying narrative to... Or actually, Steve, you said it early when we were hanging out, that there's no narrative gravity to drag these characters through. It's just almost the happenstance of them existing in this small segment of the world. Proximity, drawing them together. Overall, I enjoyed the character structure, but I think it was very dependent upon, or they were attempting to have the weight be the thematic thrust, that gravity to pull all these characters in. And I don't know if it succeeded perfectly. I think it was a good movie. I think there's a potential that it could have been a great movie, but there are issues I have that and choices that the director made. So overall, I'm going to give it a fairly strong 2, but it by no means carried the weight for a 3.
All right. I mean, I see what you mean. Like, so I will give you some full disclosure. I was very much looking forward to seeing this movie, like knowing like the general gist of it and the cast of, as you mentioned, and so forth, like what it was supposed to be about. So I did enjoy it quite a bit. Yes, it's a slow burn, and yes, I agree. Like this might be the question, like plot itself, where we like sort of nitpick and like break down like how it could have elevated itself, but maybe just didn't get there at certain moments, at certain like points throughout it. So I'm going to give it a pretty strong 2. I was going to waver upon a 3, but I think in retrospect, like having talked it out and thought it out a bit, that, yeah, it's still a strong 2, but it did take some stumbles, and like maybe you guys will flesh out like some of the stumbles you thought like were like more egregious, we'll say. But plot-wise, looking at it too, and I'll expand upon like more of what I liked about it in probably character questions and so forth. So, but as of now, plot 2 for me. What do you guys think?
My problem with it was actually I like slow burns. I like slice, but this film was even to be honest with you, at the end of the day, I thought the film was boring. I thought it had a lot of potential. I don't think it was. I mean, we were talking about this earlier. I'm not really quite sure at this point if it lacked focus, because Ian brought up something that the C plot with the officer really detracted, and I agree with that. I mean, it was kind of like a beside the point. And for the serial killer couple, I thought it would have been great if we didn't see them until the end, like not have any insight into what they were doing during this time, because the first act, as Ian said earlier, is really great, and the rest of the film failed to live up to it. But there wasn't anything like I used before, like the Jarmusch film Patterson. I really wasn't sure what to think about it, and then there was something in the film, a small something that made it gel for me, and there was nothing in this film, like No Country for Old Men we talked about before. There was the ending of it really gelled the film for me. There is not that in this film.
Yeah, so like it's interesting. There's like all these different stories that are happening in this movie, and for the most part, they all seem like their own movies, and any one of them could have probably been fleshed out into a better
into itself, yeah,
part of it than it became as like just a small part of it. There was like the father's story in the beginning, which definitely seemed like its own movie. There was Arvin's story, Tom Holland's story. There was the story of the preacher and his, kind of sister. There was the cop. There was the serial killers. And they were all like partial stories. Nothing was really fleshed out like I wanted it to be. And I think that's where I had a lot of problems. And like you said, Ian, as I mentioned earlier, everything's supposedly like tied together in the end, but there didn't really feel like this sense of narrative gravity, as we were talking about, that like made them all flow together. It just seemed like they were all their own thing, and like the ending was written because they were supposed to tie together at the end, not because the narrative wanted them to, or had this like feeling of going to that point. And that was big for me. I'm probably going to give plot a 1, to be honest, just because all those different things didn't really add up for me. And I am going to give it credit in a lot of other places. But for me, this is where this movie failed the most, was the plot and how it just didn't gel ever. Like, really. Like, each one of these stories had their own narrative ending, but the points where they tried to like tie the whole thing together really fell apart for me, and that's going to be a big mark against this movie.
Well, since we had a pre-discussion on this, there's an intention of a narrative braid happening.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at other works that have done it, whether LA Confidential that has the police corruption, whether you have No Country for Old Men, it's legitimately premised around MacGuffin of the money that they're all after. So there's a MacGuffin that's drawing all the characters together. There's a weight that is. Here, it just seems like happenstances. It seems like at that point, even though this might be real for random characters to meet up with each other, it comes off as
Contrived, right?
yes.
Yeah.
When it could be argued in real life, contrived things happen all the time. But when we have an expectation as a viewer of a medium that there's reason behind stuff, and when things seem to happen without reason, it doesn't feel earned.
Mhm.
And I think, and I agree with that point, but I still think that each individual thread, or at least for the majority, or two of the three threads, were good enough for me to go along with the entire ride.
What do you think, Chris?
I'm gonna give it a 2. I'm not gonna give it a strong 2. I'm just gonna give it. To me, there's enough in it to warrant a 2. But I don't disagree with any criticism Steve-O had, and I don't disagree with any thing that you or Ian said, for positive or for negative against the film. I'm just gonna say I'm giving it a 2.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like, or at least for me, like, it's a stronger 2, and I definitely see your points. Like, it did stumble, I guess, a bit here and there, but not enough for me to knock it down too much, but certainly not a 3. So we'll go with that, and that's how I'll call the plot. And yeah, I mean, it could have maybe touched a bit more, but it didn't, so that's how we're calling it. Well, either way, that'll move me along 2 themes, and I think this is maybe, to me, the second or third strongest point of this film. It goes back to plot, like, that a lot of shit is happening right here and there, and it sort of converges. Like, it's almost like we recently did Pulp Fiction. It's like, I'm not saying it's to that degree at all, but it comes in, like, certain characters like have their motivations and like then cross over with the characters that sort of car crash with them in a sense. But I think like they're like a theme of like using religion and or power and or like both of them as like a springboard to exploit people was certainly explored throughout this film. I think that was well done. Like, maybe again, like I said, one of the strongest points. And I think many characters like exemplified that, or at least personified that to a degree. So I'm looking at a pretty strong 1 overall for themes. Like, yeah, it's almost like your classic like Southern Gothic revenge tale, like, more or less. But I think it was a well told one in that vein, in that genre. So it's enough for me again to give it a 1. So with that, what do you guys make of themes and how you break it down?
Right. So there's definitely that. There's the theme of kind of like the religion of this movie, which is a big one, right? And God and the battle against evil play a large part in the characters and their motivations. Like for Arvin, for Tom Holland's character, seeing the way his father struggled and brought the war back with him, basically, and then running into this preacher character who's taking advantage of the young women in the town. There is this sense of like the evil of not just religion, but like something that tries to control your mind or your soul, in terms of like what his father faced in the war, and like in terms of what he's seeing in organized religion in his town. So that's an interesting part of this film. There's also, well, in terms of that preacher side story, right? There's the women who are being taken advantage of and like don't really have their own kind of agency, and then you see the serial killer part of it, and even she, who has the power of life or death over people, doesn't have her own agency in her own relationship, which is kind of an interesting thing. Like, there's a lot going on in this movie. I won't take that away from it in terms of themes. I thought it could have chosen less, I guess, and gone a little bit deeper into them. But I will say that it did go into and talk about a lot of stuff that I found pretty interesting. So,
Now for one.
yeah, I think I'm going to give it a 1.
Go on, Ian.
Well, this is going to be a weird, interesting one because I agree with your assessment of the themes, except I'm going to put a lot of that towards antagonist because that's what was antagonizing our that hypocrisy and oppression of and whether it's also the influence of trying to please a god which isn't listening
Present.
in a sense. But here's the thing: is as the argument I made for narrative, a lot of the thrust of this movie was built upon that thematic gravity, and it was a surface level exploration of this, which it doesn't have to be greater than that for this type of film, but because of the necessary weight of the themes with these parallel storylines, and I don't think it's succeeded in coalescing
Carrying
all
through.
three of them together. I don't think I can give themes a 1 just by that fault. But
I was
Chris?
waiting because I was leaning on a 0, and I heard Scott's argument, and I wanted to hear Steve-O's argument, and I'm like, But it was Ian's argument that was the point I was actually thinking about making was there are certain things that happen with characters, like the learned behavior that Arvin had because of his father, that, violence solves things, and, you can't hate Arvin for that. But by the same token, because there's nothing to make this movie gel for me, I agree with Ian's assessment that it, in a lot of ways, because it was dealing thematically in microcosms without any unifying force, I'm sticking with the 0.
All right, that's fair. Well, Chris, why don't you carry on with antagonists?
Well, antagonist is also difficult because, and I guess we'll get to this with protagonist, but the way the story is told, that it's told in different timelines from different characters' points of view, it is one of these things where you kind of have to take each. This is kind of where I'm going to give it more of a bump from any doubt I had from themes, because there are thematic ties with regard to power, with regard to things that are passed down via traditions or expectations, or, like I said, from religion to what you would learn from your parents. So I'm going to say I'm giving the antagonist a 1 because the weakness that this had thematically actually made each character stronger, their own, and whatever was antagonizing them, whatever was motivating them was stronger. The parts were stronger than the whole. So I'm going to give antagonist a 1.
I think I pretty much agree with that. I don't have much more to add. I think that's well said. Like, I'm giving it a 1, I guess, basically because of that. Like, because I felt that they were, like, as we follow these characters, as it switches back between, like you said, like, here and there, like, in the past and then, like, in the present, like, 5 years later, 7 years later, or whatever it was, and what they were dealing with, I think it resonated with me, at least, and I felt these characters' struggles, and I think that's enough for me for a 1 in general, even if sort of, like, somewhat spread out among them, but it all adds up, in my mind, enough for a 1 collectively. So
Yeah, I'll say if there's one thing that resonated with me about, but basically all the characters in the movie, is that they're antagonized. Throughout. There is a sense of antagonism going throughout, and like whether it's Arvin and his daddy issues, for lack of a better term, and like what's going on with
it's childhood trauma, I guess we'll say,
and all that stuff. I think that antagonist is pretty strong here. However, I am going to go back one question briefly, and Ian, I think I agree with you I don't know if I can give themes a 1 for all the reasons that you stated. So I think I'm going to change mine to a 0.
Okay.
But I am going to give antagonists a pretty strong 1. I think that this movie does a good job of making the characters feel like they're up against the wall, and they have no other choice but to react in the very violent way that they often do. And whether or not that's the case, it's how you feel about how they feel. So it does a good job of doing that.
As I mentioned, each individual Thrand in this, I think, worked for me. And the character work in this is fantastic. I'm probably going to give 1s to all of the stuff going forward for characters. But it's, yeah, so like each had their own antagonists, each had their own personalities. It's just the coalescing of all of them together as a full narrative that didn't quite work for me. But that by no means suggests I'm going to give anything less than a 1
So
for most
individually
character
for
works.
this question. All right. Very nice. Yes.
Protagonist was the smart thing to do in a film like this because of that reason. Because this film is very strong on character.
Yeah.
All right. Well, speaking of character, Steve-O, it's on you for the protagonists.
Yeah.
Or
and as Ian just mentioned, the character work in this movie is very strong. I mean, they did a great job casting first and foremost, and working through all these characters are some really strong actors doing some good work. Tom Holland as Arvin is really good. He's your foremost protagonist, right?
I would say he's like mostly the focal point for most of the film.
Actually, his father and him blend into an essential
character. Yeah. That's true, because his father is a protagonist at the beginning of the movie.
Skarsgård.
Played by Skarsgård, yes.
Bill Skarsgård. And then you have, I guess, Lenora, who could be looked at as like a secondary protagonist, right? And she does a good job too, until her untimely demise. And I guess that's pretty much it. But I think that those characters as protagonists do a very good job of
carry through
representing the characters, and the script, if there's any point where it's pretty strong, is I think in the character development of these people. So I will give protagonists full credit on that.
Yeah, I will generally agree. I don't have much more to add. I mean, I keep marking myself a 1 for this question. Yeah, like you said, like the casting was an excellent choice across the board, and each of them did a really, really good job with the characters that they were given to portray. And I really don't have any complaints. So I'm giving a very solid to strong 1. So
I give it a 1.
All right, 1 for you, Chris, as well. All righty, let's move along to then secondary. Anyone who isn't what we just said, and that'll be you, E.
I actually thought that the world they built, even though it was small in its sense, but it's a small town too. But I think it really gave at points a very Stephen King-like small town look at things. But you had the xenophobia rampant throughout to the father coming in to the town, and also in a lot of ways, but leading to the outside nature of Tom Holland's character. It feels like it's an isolated world where the protagonist is an interloper and overall, I just think that a lot of the character work in this was fantastic. A lot of the secondary characters had their points, and even though perhaps the whole sheriff plotline, to my mind, was extraneous, it still was
it added to the world.
Again, actually, Stephen King-ish style small town actually describes this work very well.
Go, Chris.
I really, really, really want to mention the grandmother and the uncle, because not only are they the only two people to actually go through all the timelines here, but I really liked their dynamic. You have some person that's there and basically lives her ideals, sees her ideals, has a bit of chosen, ignorance, and seeks approval from
small town mentality, I guess. Right?
but his uncle seems to really understand what's going on, but in his own way is powerless, whether willingly or unwillingly, to do anything about it. He is an observer, but he is aware, whereas the grandmother is an observer and for whatever reason is unaware. Those two characters are the ones that like had the biggest impact on me throughout the film. I found them really interesting. So I'm giving a very strong one just on the basis of those two characters.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good point. I think they were well portrayed and well acted characters. But of course, like I'm also giving credit to Jason Clarke and Riley Keough as like the serial killer couple, because like if we didn't mention it in when we were describing plot, it's basically a neo-American Gothic tale, right? And like that sort of thing is just intrinsic to this kind of story. And I think they did a good job as those characters. And as you mentioned, E, everyone else around it also filled it out. So like by and large, in a very broad way, I'm going to give Secondary a pretty damn strong one. And yeah, for those reasons. What do you got, Sivo?
Yeah, I think that the secondary characters did a great job in this. Pattinson, number one.
Yes, thank you. We didn't even talk about him. Yeah, go on.
He does a terrific job in pretty much everything he's in these days. As the creepy priest, he was very good. You had a bunch of characters that you guys already mentioned. And they, Sebastian Stan played the sheriff.
Yep.
What the hell is his name? Lee Bodeker, who is always running for sheriff at all times during this movie.
Election's coming up.
Yeah. So and you guys already talked about a lot of the other characters. I think that they did a very good job, and I don't have too much more to say about it. I just think that they deserve a 1.
All right. Very nice. That's across the board. So it'll bring me to dialogue. So I'm not too torn, but I guess we'll get into like the whether or not you like the voiceover stuff, I guess, right? But what is said between characters, I think, for the most part, is generally fine, and certain points and certain scenes can be elevated. So for that very reason, I'm probably giving it a 1 anyways. And I didn't mind the voiceover too much. Like the narrator was fine to me. It felt like it fit into a Gothic tale that is in this vein. So it didn't like distract me or didn't like break me out of it. So that's my initial analysis. Good.
I even liked the narrator when he got a little bit sassy towards the end.
Sort of like kind of breaking down a bit, like in a sense.
When he started opining on scenes, actually won me.
Yeah.
But
I don't know.
I really enjoyed the Baptist infusion in the town. It felt very real for that era. Religion was prominent in everywhere you went. Even the it felt like an American Gothic horror.
Exactly.
And how
That's
those
basically
were written,
what I'm saying.
O'Flannery stories and things like that. And I felt they captured that style incredibly well. And so, yeah, I'm going to give it a strong 1, actually.
All right. What do you boys think?
I did not enjoy the voiceover. I didn't think that the dialogue was particularly bad, but I thought it was a weird choice to stick so strongly to the novel that you're basically reading the fucking novel like throughout the movie.
And to be fair, sorry, Steve, you did say like, as a we had a texturing going on. You're like, your mileage may vary about how you like it. So yeah, go on.
So I don't know. It's and as you just mentioned, I'm sure your mileage may vary. It bugged me that there was so much voiceover narration throughout this movie, and
if I may, I thought there would be more by how much you were commenting about it. There's long scenes where the narrator didn't say anything. And I'm like, and then he would come back in. But I'm like, I imagine like it was almost a Blade Runner-esque thing where him talking over every scene. But
I would guess, and I would be willing to put money that there is more voiceover narration in this than there is in Blade Runner. But
depends what version you watch.
Well, I suppose so. But it I don't know. It kind of got to me after a while, where it was
Didn't hit you the right way.
like this narrator has more movie time than like freaking Anthony Hopkins in Silence of the Lambs. Like, I don't know. It bugged me. That's not to say that the dialogue was bad. I'll probably end up giving it a 1. Just
Oh,
because
really? Okay. I marked you down for a 0. Okay.
the scenes between the characters are good. It's just like that one little thing, and I don't even necessarily call it dialogue. It's probably going to go more into style.
Mm.
So we'll see what I do with that. But I think the dialogue specifically was pretty decent in this movie. Nothing to give it a 0 to.
You're giving it a 1?
Yeah, I'm going to give it a 1.
Okay. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I was going to say narrator was too Prairie Home Companion for me. That was hard because I'm leaning towards 0 actually. Because while I did enjoy some of it, Ian said something today that really, I know we're referring to a lot of precasts, which is something we try not to do. But the thing is, he said that the had a tendency to over-explain things, and the narration was part of it. But to be honest with you, and this is going to sound like a weird thing because we usually give credit for nonverbal, I'm actually going to say that there was actually too much dialogue in places I don't think there needed to be dialogue.
That's a fair point.
So because of that, because I'm sitting here, I'm thinking like, well, am I going to punish it for not? I'm like, it really needs more nonverbal than it is. So I'm
Totally get you.
Thank you for bringing it up, Chris, because I was going to hit this in style, but I think you might have inspired. So, yeah, I just want to address this since I said, since you mentioned what I said earlier. The problem, one of the biggest problems I have with this is they didn't let anything sit with you. There's a great example of this where Tom Holland beats up bullies in his school, which mimics a scene earlier of his father after 2 poachers had insulted his wife. And it's like, yeah, you get that it's a mimic of his father. They're both in the car, they're both bloody knuckles. And then they cut back to the past. Like, I didn't need
Completely superfluous.
just let it sit. Let me. And there was the first act actually did that very well, and then later on they started over explaining. They started whether it was verbal or nonverbal. It just they didn't let the audience sit and mull on the ideas that I was trying to present. So yeah, I think I might switch over to 0 here. I was going to bring this up in style, but I think that the argument you made, Chris, is perfect for dialogue.
0 for dialogue for you now, on retrospect. All right, fair enough.
I get that. I'm definitely going to put that into style though, on my side.
Yeah, I think it's very it's you can sort of ship it either way. So I think we're splitting the difference either way. And with that, speaking of style, Chris, what do you think about the style?
This is another difficult one because part of the problem I had with the film wasn't. I like films with narrators when appropriate. I keep going back to the point I made and Ian made actually with over explaining, and I did. I found the narration jarring. The film felt. I was actually bored during most of the film. Beth and I were pretty bored, and believe me, we were really looking forward to seeing this. And the problem is, it's not a bad film. It's not a bad film by any stretch of the imagination. It's not. It's just had so much potential, and it just didn't quite gel for me. So I'm leaning towards 0 on this, believe it or not, even after what I said about dialogue. But I open up the floor because, if it's a gray area for me, I'm open to listen to any argument.
Okay, so allow me to maybe try to change your mind. That I see you guys' points, and like the points you just made and deducted from dialogue, I think I'm going to give more credit to style because think about this. If you think about style, just the cinematography, I think it was fucking spot on. Like the shots were incredible. Some of like the way they matched like what was happening to like the big open shots of like the woods, or when it was like in the church, like the claustrophobic windows, right, and like the shadows and stuff. Like it was perfect Gothic Americana style to me, as filmed. So that's my argument to give style a 1. So I'll open up with that, and I'll let you go. Good.
I'm going to give it a 1, and I'm going to say this, and this is something that gets me with the Robert Eggers films, is the fact that when things were lit with candle, they were lit with candle. I don't know what the lighting was like, but they did a really good job of being immersive, that there was no artificial light. There was, at nighttime, there was no day for night or anything like that. And, and stuff like this, that goes a long way.
Right. It doesn't seem like much, Chris, but like when it adds up, I think it does show through. So I'm agreeing with you, and that's my argument. Good.
Nice work.
I will agree this movie looked really good. I think that's a very big positive in terms of style. However, we just talked about a bunch of stuff that I'm putting into style, like the voiceover narration, the over-explanation of things, the not allowing your viewers or your audience to take in and examine the things that they've just seen, like kind of explaining it to them, which is just annoying. And that's part of the narration, right? Like that's like, oh, we need to say everything that's going on instead of letting you figure out what's happening yourself. And like, it just didn't sit that well with me, all that part of it. And that's a huge part of the style of this movie to me.
That's fair.
So I think I'm going to give style a 0.
0? All right.
Yeah.
All the critiques you just made, I dumped on dialogue. Overall, though, what I said about the Baptist styling, the world they built, it felt very real to me. Yeah, it was a small world, but that's what it is. It's a small town in West Virginia or Ohio. I forget where
both of them, actually. Yeah.
And I enjoy period pieces. I actually look for detail in period pieces. I thought they did a fantastic job. Cars, dress, and the transitions from the 50s to the 60s.
Yeah, that's true.
Overall, I thought that it was handled very well.
Yeah, if we didn't mention, it's a period piece between like the late 50s into like the early 60s. So, yeah. So you're giving it a 1 to style officially?
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. I mean, I agree that I think all the visual style is really good. It's just the meat and potatoes of the movie got to me, I guess. We'll say.
All right. I got you.
What Scott reminded me of when he talked about it, because like I said, these things were like everybody's making a valid point, but the fact that I did notice things like the lighting, that I did notice things like the cars, that was the one constant in the film was, the narration was annoying, but like to look at it, the way it's shot, the continuity, I thought was fine.
And they made those chicken livers look really appetizing.
Delectable.
So
and I will, it's funny, I guess I'll mention it because I thought you guys might, the soundtrack I thought was also quite good, like pretty solid, and I'm going to ship that into style as well. So like the music tracks they chose, so like period pieces, like period appropriate pieces, but also like thematically and like appropriate to the scenes that were happening. So that's all. I just want to throw that out there. All right, let's bring it on home. Steve-O, you recommend The Devil All the Time or no?
This is a tough one. I probably won't watch this again. But like I know that there are a lot of people that I would say, yeah, you'll probably like this. Like at least you'll enjoy it, So I don't know. I tell you what,
Okay.
You guys say what you're gonna say, and I'll come back to myself at the end.
All right. Well, I'll make it easy. Like, yes, I think I'm the one in this case that enjoyed it the most, and yes, I'm going to recommend it. I would watch it at least one more time, maybe not any more times beyond that, but I certainly wouldn't mind another viewing, a second viewing, and I would recommend it more broadly than I wouldn't. So
I have a deep pull.
okay.
You guys remember Nocturnal Animals?
Yeah.
Yes.
This reminds me of how I came out of Nocturnal Animals,
Nice.
which I'm like,
Yeah.
there's something here that and that also had threads that.
Good call.
But I don't like to say what will stick with me, but I feel that these are similar levels of film. I wish I remember whether I recommended that or not. However, I think
How much I remember Nocturnal Animals too.
But I did. It did stick with me. It's one of those random movies, but
That's good
I
enough,
had
yeah.
the same like kind of inherent instinctual feeling about that as I do in this one.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm going to give it a recommendation because it's good enough.
More worth a watch.
Yeah,
than it isn't,
like
I would say. Yeah.
like don't go in expecting great things, but if you go in just for a kind of a Sunday afternoon romp, it's a decent film. Like I enjoyed it.
What was the film you just mentioned?
Nocturnal Animals.
I've never.
Michael Shannon.
He's already forgotten.
I've never seen that film, but I remember editing that podcast. Scott was going to give it a score, I think a 2, and Ian's like, no, you're not, and here's why. Because a good part of what
It was a very classic moment in our podcast, certainly.
So yeah, I remember that Nocturnal Animals, but I'm not going to. If somebody asks me if they're interested in seeing it, I won't dissuade them from seeing it. But this isn't a movie I'm going to go tell anybody to go see. I'm going to give it merit where it's deserved, but it's definitely something that artistically, I would, it's artistically, yeah, but to the average person, it would not be anything I'd say you have to see this.
Sure.
But I also think that it's worth seeing just for the fact that how many up-and-coming actors are in it.
The performance is
like you want to see a showcase for all of the next generation of actors. This is a fairly decent.
This might be a good one. Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, I mean,
what do you think?
There are a lot of big actors in it for sure. I don't know. I think that it's interesting. Ian, you use Nocturnal Animals to convince yourself to give it a 1. I think I might use your same argument to give it a 0 because I'm like I think about Nocturnal Animals only when you guys bring it up. I think, and you're right. It did have kind of the same feeling at the end of it. It was like this wasn't the worst, but like I have no interest in seeing it again anytime soon. Or like, I'm not gonna of my own volition go and watch this movie again by any means. So I think I might give it a 0 for recommend. And I'm actually giving this a lower score than I thought I was going to.
Fair, that's fair. All right. Well,
yeah.
Certainly that's entitled to you. So I'm trying to give it the score. Someone might have to do math for me. But the final breakdown is I've given it the highest with a 9, which I kind of like thought that going into it. And then second highest is Ian with a 7. Chris a little bit behind that with a 6. And Steve-O, you've given it a 5. We mostly agreed upon plot, -1. Themes was a little iffy, and also dialogue was like the biggest, also like toss up, split down the middle. So that is a 27 divided by 4. Help me out here, boys.
Is it 6.75?
6.75.
Yeah.
Yes.
Nice.
Math.
All right, very nice. Thank you. And yeah, like that's fine. Like I get it. Like I'm not saying like it's an amazing like must see film, but I enjoyed it quite a bit. And the funny thing I was saying, like if I could mention some off-cast stuff, like it seems the last couple of weeks the films have been doing, like somebody has like one of you guys like, oh, this is the film for me. This film I like. This one for me, it's within my range, and I quite enjoyed it. So yeah, I may have a slight bias for it, but I'm not saying it's fucking mind blowing. But I did like it quite a bit, and I think we've reflected the range of interpretations of it and reactions to it.
As if your mileage may vary with this film.
Exactly.
Some people.
Yeah. Maybe it might be the poster child for it. Your mileage may vary, but if you're like within it, if you're into it in general, then you might want to check it out. But you could probably skip it if it's not necessary. So with that, I think we'll sign off. I've been your host here in the deep south of murder mysteries and serial killers, Scott Thurlow. Been here with Chris Morgan.
Have a good night.
And Jonathan Ian Manzer.
A good man is hard to find.
And Stephen Amosi.
Maybe in the end it's not our time which defines us, but how much time the devil, in this case, all.
Good night.
Remember that. Yeah. Words to live by. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time. Cheers.
Editing and engineering by Stephen Hermosi. Music by Christopher Morgan. Check us out on YouTube and iTunes for the shows, and on Facebook and Twitter for updates. Or mods?